All right, good evening, and welcome to another live stream covering World Creator 2022. Hope y'all are doing all right. Nice to see you, Easy Prey. Thanks for joining, and we're going to definitely let it snow today. Basically, the whole goal today is just having a little fun with snow and applying some snow textures to a couple different variations, particularly a sort of mountain peak. There are a wide variety of ways we can think about snow in general. The sticky substance that, or the fluffier it is, it kind of has more prone to falling into cracks and crevices. If it's sort of wet and clammy and stuff, it'll stick to things, especially under high elevations. So a lot of the time, snow won't stick to really sharp surfaces or my sharp, I mean steep surfaces. So, anywhere between 85 and 90 degrees or so in steepness. And if it does stick, then it's very cold, like the stone or rock face is very cold. And it's usually for the higher elevations. But we're going to try and do a couple variations of applying snow and what you can do about making your own. But you can also apply a snow texture, which we're going to do that, but I'm going to try and showcase some of the ways that I kind of do snow first just by colors. So before we get into the actual mountain range part, remember last time or the last stream, we kind of covered glaciers, and I kind of showcased doing glaciers sort of in a small scale down, running down the side of a mountain. This was just a test that I did that you're seeing here on screen of sort of a large glacier. So this piece right here is still kind of working on getting it to look just right, but it's a test on looking at some of those massive glacier runs that kind of push the terrain to the sides. And when you're down here under flat areas, what that kind of looks like. It's just a monstrous glacier, and you see these in Alaska actually, or in a couple other places around the Arctic. I'm drawing a blank, and I can't remember. There's a name for that, a very famous glacier up in Alaska, but I can't remember for the life of me what it was called. But real quick, seemingly how you do this. Let me just turn this down just a smidge. All right. Seemingly how you do this, it's kind of playing a little bit on what we did last stream, except what I had to do in order to get it to appear right is I went into custom base shape here, and I basically, if I can do my key bindings right, I basically selected the entire terrain and then I selected tilt. So then I basically selected the tilt edit mode, and I tilted the terrain to the right just a little bit. So that way I can kind of get a little bit of flow going. So it's hard to tell, but there is a slight high ridge on this end, and there's a lower valley on this end. And in addition, in my filter stack, this design curve is really interesting. So I basically, whatever information was right down here, I pulled it up to make it flat by editing this curve. And also at the same time, it pushed down the top values. It kind of squished everything down. So it's a very interesting way to reshape the terrain. And that's what the curve does. I didn't go about messing too much of the source range or destination range. We'll actually probably have a stream on doing some different curve effects. Hey Zen, how you doing? Welcome tonight. We're just going over a quick run through of this single large glacier that I've kind of testing out making. But really what I did, there's a couple cool things actually. There's a couple cool things about this. Again, in the previous stream, we talked about how the mud is used to create sediment. And that's basically, if I remove this mud and sedimentation, this is kind of what it looks like as is. And if I add that mud and sedimentation or mud sediment back, you see it's filling up this area, but I am filling it to a specific region. So I'm choosing where I want that glacier to be. And then I'm actually using let me go back to this heat map. I'm using the rock distribution to kind of get, if I hide rocks. So here's the rock distribution, or minus the rock distribution. So this is what it looks like. It looks pretty stark. If I add the rock distribution back, which we're going to cover this, it kind of adds some sort of tapered effects to it. But the real beauty is glaciers, especially these large ones, have sort of those striation details, like cuts. And that was pretty prominent in the last stream down the mountain. I just used the flow distribution to get that kind of effect to look like it's flowing. But flow doesn't work too well in this circumstance because it's still pretty flat. So what I did was I added a general add and set. And I'm only affecting levels 12 and 13, just very subtle details. And I'm adding a whirly noise with some distortion, flow on top of that, and masking it to the same area. So if I were to, it's not in effect right now, but really whirly noise plus flow and masking it to this area, it's doing just a little bit here. But that's enough, once I turn it on, to add this effect. I'm basically adding this sort of icy detail back on top of the glacier. This is another cool, and we're going to we should have another stream just dedicated to add and set, but add set is a great way to add noise detail that I found out. See, that's all I'm doing. I'm just using the general add set filter to add this noise based on whirly, and we can actually turn on contrast and really spice it up. You see, it looks a little weird that way, but if I turn the contrast down a bit, maybe we can have a little bit more control. Yeah, there we go. I turn it down just a little bit more. There, it's kind of back to where it was. So this was just one quick thing I wanted to showcase before we get into snow on what my sort of play run through of a larger glacier looks like, to kind of tie into last week's stream. So we're going to now divert to doing the snow. This is an example of the snow, some of the snow texturing. This was actually done really quickly. So we're going to now start a new project. Don't worry about saving this one. And we're going to go through creating some snow. Let's see. I may or may not want to. Let's see how this terrain goes. I don't know if I want to do the base style. Let's see what a single mountain would look like. We're gonna actually do a YouTube stream to kind of really explain these different styles and how to do different things. The terrain that you just saw was actually created initially with where is it at? I think it was Canyon. Yeah. Was it? Yeah, I think it was Canyon. So let's see which one that we can kind of start off here. So Mountain Voronoi. I think maybe a single mountain is fine. I think that should be all right. We'll not play with it too much, but let's increase this noise height just a smidge, or decrease this one so we can get a little bit more detail. Let's lower this so that our terrain min height is close to 0 meters, as you can see right here. All right, so this seems like a good start. We'll roll with this. If this doesn't turn out to look too well, I'll just open up a terrain I've already started and get going. So let's quickly, if I remember what I did, see rocky wide. Let's do erosion rocky. I don't think this is what I wanted to really showcase. Here we go. And we could do that. but let's make ridge flows sort of, where's my height? We'll make this one kind of a lower value on the height. All right, that should be fine. I want the top to kind of to be a little bit rocky. And actually, let's do, this is what I wanted to. I wanted to balloon this. I wanted to balloon it out a little bit. Lower the length. I'm just running through this really quickly. And I'm also wanting to balloon just the lower portions. Again, I don't want to fully explain necessarily why, but the lower portions of the mountain are going to be a little smoother than the higher portions of a mountain because of erosion. Erosion will naturally, create this sort of fall off. And then we're going to do, let's see, sedimentation, because we have to add sedimentation. Mud in this case is pretty nice, but let's do fill soft, and then I'll do a erosion of thin flows, maybe soft flows or ridge flows. I think ridge flows ought to be really subtle. I'm not liking that too much, so we'll just go back to add mud. Mud is lovely, but we're also, again, going to change its height to be just the lower portions. There we go. This may look a little jank, but there's nothing wrong with a little jank. All right, maybe now we do that, and then we'll just change the length to something really shallow. All right. And one last filter. Ridge, but we'll make its distribution convex. So it's just shaping the top portions. We'll do that. And then, so this is kind of a harsh edge. So I'm going to blur that edge quite drastically, like that. And then also make the upper portions the areas that I want to be pretty sharp. So that's not bad, but let's now change our sun and skies to be not too harsh. There we go. Oh, and 1 meter is fine, but let's go to 1/4 meter. Oh, man. So that's one mistake that I just did. So let's see. I don't want the higher elevations. Hey, welcome. There's no problem being a little late. We are just about to start the juicy stuff here in just a second. Once I decide to actually showcase the good stuff. And I think that's fine. All right, so we'll just use this to start, even though I don't like, let's see, what is, I don't like these flows. It's a little too much. I'm trying to think which one it was that did all of this erosion. You know what? We'll just roll with it for right now and we'll move forward because I want to get into the texturing part. Okay. So to texture snow, there's a couple things that you'd have to think about is where is the snow, where is this mountain located regionally? Is it going to be a high elevation or a low elevation that doesn't get a whole lot of snow? And also the sun makes a big difference. So a lot of the times snow will, I'll do this later. A lot of times snow will capture in the crevices or the sort of the cavity areas, like right around here in the sort of low-lying areas. And if the sun is not hitting it, like obviously everything that's in this shadow here is not going to melt. So wherever the sun is at, the sun won't melt certain things. So if I wanted to say, hey, let's texture this based on the sun angle. So parts on this side will be a different sort of melting factor than the parts that are covered up in the shade or in the shadow on this side. And we can do that. That's one way to do it. Another way is to think about as snow is melting, all that snow in the concave areas will hang around more because it's deeper. Typically, snow will build up in the concave areas and, like I said, be much deeper. So let's see, which I'm actually trying to fill up some. So let's do a fill soft here. And we will fill these, cavity, concave areas. There we go. So we can say that snow in sort of this area will build up more, even though it's not really showing too well on our terrain here. Let's remove this. Let's add mud and do the same thing because for some reason of course, the live stream is not allowing me to showcase that as well as I wanted to. But mud does pretty well, I think. All right, we'll do that. All right, so it's filled up that area just a little bit. So let's get to the actual texturing part. So let's add a couple of textures here. We're going to start off by making it rocky. So we'll do sort of a dark rock here. Maybe a slight bluish one here. Oh, maybe I should actually see it. There we go. That's a bit too. We'll add another rock variant. And this rock will be, let's see, we'll do curvature this time. Set this below that one. And actually, all right, most of this is going to be covered up by snow anyway. So let's now think about the different types of snow. Let's first do snow based on just what it would look like if it just capped the entire top. So it's nice and white. So again, one of the ways that you can go about doing this is doing the height. So if we know that snow is really capping this top, we could, feather it down. But sometimes this feather is not quite so. It's not a gradient like this. It's too smooth, and sometimes it looks like that from a distance. It can look like it's really smooth from a distance, but really, snow doesn't fall in like a gradient. It falls in patches or it falls in groupings. So we could break this up. What I would suggest is making this gradient pretty low, and then we could actually apply an FX and sometimes a simple flow. If we wanted to pull this down, we can kind of pull it down some. Let's see, direction is fine. But it's not pulling it down too as much as I want. Let's see how small flow does for us. So small flow does do the blurring that we've talked about a little bit, but it's not quite there yet. And I just removed everything that I just did by accident. So we'll Control Z to put that back. All right, another thing that we could add is that I like to add, we could add a little bit of distortion. So let's turn off small flow. So this is one, let's pull this there. This is one thing that you could do to start off with. Add a little bit of distortion. Instead of it being smooth, just go ahead and distort it pretty drastically. And you can change, if you increase the scale, that distortion is going to be right here, or it's going to be really small. But if you decrease the scale, the distortion becomes pretty large. And sometimes you'll want this. Maybe you have varying levels of distortion with different sort of tonalities of snow. That would work. But let's say we want to just affect the edge here. And so the distortion octaves kind of changes up how rough this edge is. So if we were to pull this all the way down, you see how smooth that is. Or if we increase the octaves, it adds more rough variation. Now with the distortion here, if we turn simple flow back on, you see how it's kind of pulling everything back down. If I were to remove the strength, you could just do it barely, or you can go all the way. So you're kind of feathering it out, basically, just ever so slightly. And also, if it's just a little bit too much, another thing that we could add, and this is a great add, FX plus, we can go to noise offset. And with noise offset, it's basically going to, right here between this transition, it's going to add some noise. So if I were to increase this slider, you see it adds way too much noise. Let's see, if I reduce the weight, it changes the blending of the rest, but we don't want to deal with that. We just want this noise to be ever so slightly. So, and I'm talking like, if I zoom in here, just barely. So maybe 0.3. See how it's just adding a little detail to the edge there. So 0.3 is fine. So this is one way. And, if we were to change, let's see if we change the distortion amount. And sometimes that's fine. If I were to do pretty big, or really small, I think maybe somewhere around here's fine. Now let's just do that a little bit more, and let's increase the strength. Actually, let's just make the strength just ever so slight. So there we go. So this is one way that we can increase the cap, and it's probably distorted a little too much. Maybe like that's fine. And of course, we could change this however we want. Now, if you want to add more variation, then we can do that. So let's think of now, let's turn off, for the time being, let's turn off this one right here. We're going to add a new one. So now let's think about how snow would react in relation to the sun's direction. Add distribution, and you can actually have an option here for sun direction. So right now, our sun is wherever it's at. I can't find it right there. So all the snow really should be on this side. So let's actually change our, increase our sun strength and our sky strength so that we can kind of see this. Would Voronoi be better option than distortion sometimes? Yeah, you can certainly, which we'll come back to this. You can certainly add Voronoi. If I were to turn off distortion, add Voronoi, you can do that. But even with Voronoi, let's see. Let's put this up here at the front. I mean, there's multiple ways that we can go about this distorting it. So the distortion is its own little thing, but Voronoi is at least is on its own. It's on a pretty cool pattern. So yeah, Voronoi is another method, or you can do both together. So both Voronoi and distortion at the same time would be interesting. So there's plenty of methods you can go about doing this, but in our final example, we're not going to actually do any of this, and I'll get to that in just a moment. All right, so with sun direction. All right, so what this is this smoothness is saying, all right, so whatever faces, see, this snow is being filled at the exact 180 degrees or the opposite direction of where the sun is facing. Smoothness is just how many angles outside of the sun angle you're willing to accept. So you can see the higher I slide this, the more it's going to accept different angles. And you can do it sort of on a grander scale here. So I'm just going to do it pretty light. And if I rotate the sun horizontal angle here, you see it's changing the direction. So everything in shadow should be sun, but it doesn't quite get rid of those. And we can, it's not perfect. So yeah, we could do that and it would be all right. But the only problem is this sun direction is locked to, or the sun direction distribution is locked to the lighting angle. So there's no way to technically lock it because it's all based on this sun direction, which is fine. And I also wish it based itself on the sun vertical angle. So there may be someday a distribution for this, for the sun that's able to do it in shadow. But here's what I would suggest doing instead of the sun direction. If you care about it being in a certain direction or in shadow, just do the angled 3D. And I've used this a lot actually for different because you can change the different angles. So if I wanted it to appear on around, let's see, 85 degrees, the vertical angle of around 80 degrees, I can change the horizontal. So everywhere that is, let me lower this to about 1. All right. So with a smoothness of 0 to 0.1 and 80 degrees, everything that's 80 degrees is going to be textured, but based on 51 degrees from the origin point. So this is sort of like a better way of doing the sun angle. So I can texture, let me rotate this back here. All right. So angled 3D is much better at getting a lot of those striations. And this is one thing I love to use is this horizontal. And you can change the vertical. If I want it to be, let's see, 75 degrees and smooth it out some. You see we are definitely adding some detail here. Pump that back up. And what you could do is you could duplicate this by double right clicking, and you could lower the angle a little bit and rotate it. Duplicate it. Increase this angle and rotate it to the other side. So now we're just using this same filter a couple different ways. Yeah, we're just using it a couple different ways to get all these different effects. I'm going to duplicate it again. And let's say we want to make the angle around 3 degrees. Actually, let's make the angle around 45 degrees. Actually, where is this being applied to? Because there's not a lot of flat angles here. There we go. So everywhere that's red, it's where this is being applied to on that end. So, and if we take what we've just learned here and applied the same texture that we had from the very beginning, now we're starting to blend them out a little bit, though this is sort of not very, this height doesn't work too well. So what we're going to do here now is add a cavity. So let's take the step size up pretty big. So now say snow will collect, like I've mentioned before, in cavities, but they're going to sort of collect there not in every instance, well, in every instance, but when it starts to melt, the steep areas here is what's going to melt first. And snow is going to collect in sort of these collection pits or these concave pits, as you can see here before, after. And so again, if you don't like that sort of harsh transition, some areas, if you look at snow that's been melting for a little bit, it will have a sharper transition. But if it's new snow, we could still, we can add the Voronoi edge, like you mentioned before, but I'm not going to actually use that. And I'm going to remove that. I'm going to say the small flow, just going to make it a very small strength so it's kind of blurred that edge. And then I'm going to add a noise offset. So this noise offset here takes that blurred edge and makes the blur more of a noise pattern. So this is another variant that we could do. And sometimes you'll see snow in cavities like this. And if we were to change the height here, if you don't like that harsh edge right there, then that's where some of the, let's do a fast flow. Let's see. That's a bit too fast. Hold on. Iterations. Flow cutoff. And now that's on a completely different pipeline. Let's see. We could, Voronoi that edge if we want. Let's try simple flow this time. See, we're in the realm of just playing around with it. And a smidge more noise offset. But I'm not a fan of that. A lot of this is trial and error to figure out exactly what you like. But we're going to stick with this. And let's remove these now. So let's hide this. So we can do another variant. Now, sometimes you'll see even people in our own community use flow. And flow is a decent sort of pipeline, but it's assuming that it's sort of when the snow is melted beyond this point and converted to this point. Like if you were to sort of combine the two, you can kind of get some snow in these areas. But let's do, I'm going to combine these in a way here. But slope is the slope distribution is sort of the number one way that I like to do snow. And so let's sort of increase our iterations here so we can get a nice amount of white snow. Let's do a lot of white here. A lot of white. Come on now. There we go. So this doesn't look bad. So this is assuming that the snow is basically the runoff. But let's say this is sort of the micro detail where snow collects, but we want to rough it up. And so before, I guess we could add the noise offset, but a better way to do this is by adding slope. Slope is really, really good, especially if I want the range to be, because I've said snow won't really collect so much on the super steep stuff unless it's really sort of sticky. Oh, I don't want that. Come on now. There's definitely some optimization that is still in the works. All right, so I'm going to make this pretty striking angle together. All right. Even more so together. Even more so together. All right, so we're basically filtering out. You see what we're doing? We're adding snow in the crevices of where that micro detail is, but we're choosing that we want that detail to be within that specific range. And we could duplicate this, and we can change that range to be something else. Oh, I must have turned off the generation button. I did. I accidentally turned off real-time generation. All right, so you see we've adding these details here. It's still based on flow. If I were to feather this up some, or take the other one and slightly feather it down some, you see this is sort of giving us the snow that's kind of like that powder collection. It's still part of the runoff, but it's not super heavy. Like it doesn't have to be just baked in there. It's still lightly powdered, but still follows the sort of pipeline of the flow distribution, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do another one. But this flow distribution is a little heavy. Let's do one right in the middle. We're waiting for the so-called real time to happen here. Nope, nope, nope. Grab it, move that up. So you have to be careful with flow because flow is pretty heavy. And it's just one of those things that they are working with optimizing it. And it's obviously has some work left to really get things put together. All right, I'm going to also add a cap to this. Now there are many ways we can do snow, and I'm going to showcase an example in a little bit of one that I've been working on, where we can apply, let's see, step size. The best thing that you can do really is using the slopes, just using a variations of just slope. And we're going to actually remove all of these textures and do just showcase just a variation of slope. Hey, what's up, Jack? You finally made it. Glad you could finally make it. All right, so in conjunction with height, cavity, we're also going to, that's a bit too much. Height and cavity in conjunction with slope is the three main ingredients for having a pretty convincing amount of snow. And I'm going to add distribution on here again, do slope, and I'm going to have the higher numbers here, or sort of a mid-range of numbers. Man, the flow looks nice, but it's really affecting our performance here. Actually, I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to remove all of these because that flow distribution is really sort of hitting us hard. All right, let's do the methods that I particularly like, and especially when I showcase this next terrain. We're going to do everything based off slope. Everything, at least to start. So I'm going to move this sort of, and see, even just doing that with try not to do the snow with too much of this slope range unless you do it very subtly enough to where it adds this sort of powder look. Whoops, hit F to refocus. So slope is like your best friend with this effect. So I'm just going to make sure that blending is pretty low, just so that we can get a little bit of powder, but it's not too smooth. All right, and let's say if I were to increase this right here, that looks pretty sharp. So we will keep that, and I can lower this all the way if I want. If I keep lowering this, yeah, we'll just lower that. So this is just one texture that's completely slope. All right, so for this one, we're actually going to do this one as flow. And the reason why I'm going to do this one, actually, no, we're not going to do flow. We're going to do cavity. So let's change this color to a very light blue. So this is a sort of a light blue hue, ever so slightly. And we'll do a big cavity here. And then we're kind of adding all this stuff that we've learned a little bit together. So a low strength. And then noise offset. Right there. Is that powder line look coming from slope only? Yeah. So let me hide this texture here. So that line here is, that little powder look is coming just from the slope. If I were to, let's see, this is the wrong one. So It has to do with this sort of fade range here. So it's fading 6%. But if I were to remove it entirely, you see that these little bits of snow pockets are somewhere between 0 and 76 degrees in slope. I could increase this and decrease this, but somewhere around 75 is fine. And if you wanted to blend these little dots just a little bit better to kind of add that powder-ish look, that's where this fade slider comes in. But again, just make it just a few percent. You don't want it to be too much unless you want the side of your rock to be kind of powdery. And like I said, if you're in higher elevations, that powder look may be okay. I mean, this is still just 8 degrees. So, but we're going to keep ours about around 4. And here's the beauty of this. If we duplicate this, let's say I want a different range of about, 87 to 83 degrees. See, I'm just also adding slope detail right here. See, it's a completely new slope, and I'm going to try to get away from it sticking too close, too hard on these edges. If I were to lower that top value, see how it's just adding a little bit. So adding a little bit is fine. And maybe the lower value here is blending down some. So the texture that we started out with, the slope high value, I'm blending up about 4 degrees. The one that's above, I'm blending down about 2.5 degrees. So you've got this, you can kind of fake this sort of line however you want. There you go. So slope does some amazing things. And then I'm going to add this cavity pocket. If I were to add it, let's do it right there underneath. So this is now assuming that snow collects in the concave areas, and we can adjust however much that basically we can adjust how much snow collects in those areas by changing the step size to the cavity. So we'll lower the cavity. It's going to collect on a lot smaller pockets, and that doesn't look that great. They'll really collect to big pockets. You don't want it to be too small unless if it's small enough to where you can't discern sort of the individual striations. Like this scene is fine, and you can still see some rock, and this is sort of like a really snowy day. But if it's snow and melted, then you can add these large pockets. And then, we can come back and add a white cap to kind of blend that together if you want. Also, we could, let's see, this one was sloped. We could remove this bottom range here. Let's see, this one was also, let's see, which one was that? It's this one. So with cavity, I also like to combine cavity either with height or slope as well. But I'm going to do it with slope this time. So I'm going to combine cavity with slope, make it the higher portions. That way, we can keep the cavity pretty much these higher portions right here. That way, we can assume that if you wanted the bottom area here to be dirt or grass or something, all the snow can stick to the higher elevations. So I hope that makes sense. But in this case, I could assume that, we can just keep that there because I actually kind of like the fact that let's add a material right here. and make it really dark. And we shall do roughness. And roughness is really cool. So I'm going to do a texture on roughness with the snow as well here in a second. Though roughness I have to play around with quite a bit because I forget sometimes how to use it. There we go. Roughness is a really remarkable let's see, threshold. And we shall, where is contrast? So we shall bump the contrast of that. And if we turn off heat maps, this black, see it's right here. So roughness kind of did sort of this nature here, but I'm also going to duplicate that, remove roughness this time, add flow. Maybe I don't want to add flow. Actually, shoot. Let's make this one just be a straight slope. But we shall blur the edges just a little bit like this. And lighten it up a smidge. There, just to add a little variation to the bottom. All right, but we're not here for that kind of thing. We're here for snow. So let's now, for the sake of this, just turn off all of our snow. So we just have this rough look here. Let's add a new material, and this time let's use what we just used is roughness. So roughness is really interesting. It kind of has this sort of it's rough basically. It takes what you've got and kind of, you can see how smooth that gradient is, but we don't want that. If I were to increase this roughness threshold, you can see it's kind of capturing a lot of these edge pieces. If we reduce the strength, and let's change the step size to be kind of small. You see how it's kind of capturing the rocks and adding a noise around it? This is a really wild effect. If I were to just keep the strength level pretty low and the step size, we can make it smooth, add a little bit of powdered snow, or keep it kind of a little rough. Turn off that, and you can kind of see this is the effect that it's had, but it's just a little bit too smooth. So we could add a contrast modifier, increase the contrast, and you can see what it's doing. So this is just one filter here, just the roughness of distribution. So it's kind of a mixture of things. And let's also make sure it blends like that. So this is just texturing it based off one distribution rule. That's I think is a really cool filter to have. And if you combined this, I keep saying filter, distribution rule, the roughness distribution rule with what we've created already, you can kind of have this really cool blended effect. So with roughness on or off, roughness on, we can actually reduce the overall blend value of it. So it's not affecting at all. Say we want to affect it about 50%. So we are affecting it with just a little bit of snow. just a smidge of snow here. All right. There's one other piece, I believe, if I do remember correctly. Where was that at? Okay. There was another piece that I wanted, a type of snow distribution that I wanted to show. All right. So let's add another snow material, or white in this case. Add distribution, and let's do rocks. So rocks are pretty interesting because it's kind of similar to cavity and curvature in a way, but it's sort of thinking about it in terms of both large scale and small scale, like especially with the step size. So let's say if we have the step size of maxed out, it's too smooth. Let's try to change the threshold. You see how it's kind of adding, this is kind of a camo look here. Hold on a minute. That's kind of a wild effect. Anyway, let's lower the step size. So say you like, that's not bad. Let's try to invert this. So that's an inverted version of rocks right there. And you see how it's kind of locking itself to one side. So if we were to then add another one and do angle this time, let's just add that right there. And this is purely on an angle. So that's another way we can add snow. So it's all about what sort of look you're after. It's really cool to put snow where the sun is not going to melt it. And we kind of talked about that earlier in the stream, but if we were to, let's see, which version was this? This was rocks. Oh yeah, let's just show rocks real quick. Let's see what else we can do with rocks. So rocks does that. Step size. Let's say we want the top portions to be, and that's kind of muggy, but let's blend this a little bit. And let's say we want to add contrast to kind of sharpen up those edges. And then we can add noise offset, seeing a repeat pattern to kind of feather those edges. Or say we want to have a simple flow, put that right there. Let's see, how much flow do we want? So that's one method. Or actually, this would make sense if rocks, again, were just inverted. And so we now have snow that's just collecting in concave areas, but it's been adjusted to show a little bit of variation. Let's see. There we go. So now this is just showing snow, another variant of it being in a concave area, but we're using just rocks to do it. The rock filter or distribution rule do that. All right, so let's see, which ones do we like the most? So there's angle. So you could, like we showed before, do all of your texturing based off angles, because angles are really good. I love angles. And if parts of this angle doesn't work well, you can combine angle distribution with slope, because slope is fantastic. So we have angles with slope combined. So when we think about snow falling, because I haven't mentioned this, if we were to add a brand new snow texture, if we think about snow falling, generally, just think about it coming straight down. That's why slope for snow is so great, because it's basically everything hitting the ground straight down. So as I increase this, you see somewhere around there is kind of nice. That mid range. Snow falls on the top, snow captures in the bottom. Maybe we didn't want the full piece in the bottom like we had before, and maybe the snow captures mid range like this. That's pretty much what that one was. And we just start stacking effects. This one was roughness. This one was rocks. All right, so I kind of like this one. Let's see, let's remove this. And then if we wanted to say snow really did fully cap the very top, just right there. See that edge right here? If I turn on heat maps, say if we want snow to really just capture everything at the top, because some parts of a mountain will have snow captured at the very, very top, and all angles will be affected, especially if the rock is very cold. We could, with the height range blur set to 0 this time, we could just use small flow. And let's see what the strength does. We'll just use small flow to blend that down. Add a smidge of noise to that flow. Let's see. Yeah. And now we've got sort of a pretty nice snow textured mountain range. So I hope that makes sense. I just been kind of rambling on because there's so many variations of ways we can do snow. And I know we're definitely going to be covering snow again, especially with more specific pipelines of things. So actually, this one didn't turn out too bad, and it was all done pretty much procedurally. Let's just save this. So if you guys want this file, I can share this file with you. I'll just name it Mountain 3. So if you guys would like it, I can totally share this file with you in the in chat and stuff, just so that you can kind of play around with. And I'll leave all of these available. So the different types of snow distribution here, I'll leave those available to you guys. So real quick, well, not real quick, I'm open to answer any questions about snow, because snow could be a very long topic, especially I think the next project with snow that we're going to do, we're actually going to create a scene and export it for Blender. We might do that next week. So I'm going to create a mountain range like this and put snow on one side face and have it be in the shadow face. And then we can kind of dive into that pipeline as well. But primarily snow is just one of those things depending on how it is. And remember, snow by using, let me make this red. Snow by using flow is fine, but I would definitely crank up the iterations so that you can kind of populate those edges right here. And if you're going to fill that in with white, I would add a little bit of, you can kind of darken it up a little bit. See, this is a little too dark, but say we just added a smidge, just a very smidge of an off gray. That way, when you're looking at it, you can kind of fake in those sort of ambient occlusion areas just a little bit. And it would probably be under the cap. Yeah, under the cap. Yeah. Showing how you use the noise filter was really helpful to me. Learned something new there. Oh, yeah, the noise, it's... Oh, and speaking of noise, hold on, let's... Yeah, adding these little effects plus icons here, which are really just are modifiers. I really should just call these modifiers. They're very helpful. Absolutely. We could, if we wanted to, do curvature. I forgot to mention curvature is one, but curvature doesn't do things as you can do curvature across. This is another sort of thing to kind of fake in that cavity, and the cavity being the convex variant. Curvature is pretty good, but it takes a little bit of time to kind of get used to, and it's just another piece to the puzzle to put together. And then just adding, you could do noise. So the cool thing about this noise is if you did noise, added all this noise, so you're just populating this edge with noise like you mentioned. But then if you take that noise and you distort it, you could distort the noise individually, or you could take that noise and denoise it and blur it back. So you're taking noise, adding denoise, but you have a choice of how much you want that to be denoised back in. Or there's things like edge. Edge is pretty wild, but we've got to talk about edge on a completely different circumstance, on a completely different variation of detail that we'll cover later. Oh, and so anyway, doing simple flow or small flow on top of noise kind of just pulls the noise down a little bit. So strength of 0, if we pull this noise down, see how the noise is kind of shifting down? If you did it in reverse, if you did simple flow first, it's going to add noise after the flow. So it depends on how you want it to look. So we will add these back right here. Actually, I think it was those 3 we removed. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So we are definitely over time now. I will share this landscape with you guys on Discord and let you guys have fun with it. So thank you all so much for joining the stream, and I will see you next time.